Good morning, all of you. I'm Iresha Wijerathne. I'm from PGIS, Peradeniya University. And this research based on part of my MSc thesis. The title of the presentation today is the multi-taxa distribution modeling approach to determine conservation priority areas in Sri Lanka. And these are the names of the co-authors and who supported me in this research. And I think in this research, I've tried to focus on how to combine those technically the GIS modeling approaches and the GIS applications with the zoology and the zoology and botany in this research, actually zoology, because I have focused on different taxa and how they distributed within the country. Are they actually in protected, or we have to further focus on whether they have to protect in future. So as you all know, Sri Lanka is a biodiversity rich country, and in National Conservation Review in 1996, they said that the most of the animal species and the floral species are basically present and concentrated within the majorly southwestern part of the Sri Lanka. These two maps, you can see that the most of the biodiversity rich species distribution present within the southwestern region of the Sri Lanka. And also in Professor Ashoka's presentation, we saw that most of the higher population distribution of the Sri Lanka was also concentrated in the southwestern region of Sri Lanka. So we all know, so this is a actually threat for all biodiversity. Then my research is focused on what we have to do and what kind of actions we can take to protect those biodiversity in Sri Lanka. So biodiversity hotspot in the world, we know that the Sri Lanka combined with the Western Ghats combine one of the hotspots in the world out of 36 hotspots. So biodiversity hotspot, we name is a biogeographic region that's both significant reservoir of the biodiversity and threat to the destruction. So when we discuss about the protected areas in Sri Lanka, there are 501 protected areas under 4 different acts: National Heritage Wilderness Act, and Flora Fauna Protection Ordinance, and Forest Ordinance, and National Environment Act. In the total area of Sri Lanka, there are 26.5% of these areas considered as the protected area, where these species currently under protected land under Wildlife Department and the Forest Department, basically. And the research question is, all the species, actually, especially the threatened species, are they actually protected within those protected area, or they stay outside the protected areas? So if they stay outside the protected areas, we cannot grant that they can protect further. And there are several causes that to those species can be getting extinct. So the research question is, the selected species in this research are in high diverse areas. That means more than 50% of the species which I have selected, I have considered them as high diverse areas, and whether these protected areas and the reserve forest cover where in the high diverse areas. The hypothesis is the existing protected areas and the forests do not fully cover these highly diverse areas. When we take a paper and most of the publications, I think the situation is getting changed by now. This was conducted during 2009 and up to now. Most of the species locations are point locations in the most publications, and they describe most of the environment factors differently, separate. So in this research, I was trying to combine those environment and the location data together and predict how and where these species are distributed throughout the country. So objective of this study is the species distribution modeling, predicting the spatial distribution of these selected species and identify where these protected areas and the high biodiversity, which suggest high conservation priority areas, then conducting protected area gap analysis based on these protected high diverse areas. The methodology which I have used in this study as follows: the species selection and data collection. Then identify what are the environment factors that can be highly influence the distribution of these species. Then the model prediction through Maxent modeling, and identify high diverse areas, define conservation priority areas. The Maxent is actually a model that we used for this study, which was machine learning algorithm, maximum entropy theory. That means the randomness it's used to predict where the distribution of these species by using the locations of the sighting locations or any other GPS locations that take, and it predict the distribution of these species by using the environment layers that we are feeding to this model. It's generate the prediction model where exact these species can be present, and if they further we need to recognize actually this is correct or wrong, we can go to that site, and if we can do a survey, we can identify whether this model is correct or wrong. So in this study, I have selected three different taxa: amphibians, skinks, and geckos. These are the numbers and the locations that I have used. And data collection, that is the really hard part in this research, because data sharing is very critical thing in Sri Lanka, and so many people doesn't want to share their data. So I have contact some field experts, and they gave me some sightings, and also I did some field records and published articles, and also the web-based GBIF-like databases. And tree density, elevation, and the protected area and the climate layers are used as the environment layers, which I need to feed into this Maxent model. This is the summary of the methodology which I have used. I have combined these point locations with the environment layers through the Maxent model. Then I have generated predicted distribution model for each species, which I have used, actually 89 species. So then reclassify and combine all the binary maps together. I think it's really a bit hard to explain all the methodology within this limited time allocation. So I think you can get an idea. If you have any questions, you can ask after this presentation. So then maximum combinations I have derived as high diverse area, then overlay with the protected areas, and separate where actually protected areas and outside the protected areas where high diverse species can be present, then overlay with the land use areas and define whether actual areas can be protected further. Like there are some protected areas, unprotected areas. When we overlay with the land use areas, there are some forest areas not protected actually. So we can identify those areas as further protection can be done. It's really hard to explain this within this time. So as a result, we have generated 89 maps of the geckos, skinks, and the amphibians like this. These are some examples of, we have used 11 gecko species out of 32 threatened gecko species, and 14 skink species out of 20 skink species, and 64 amphibians out of 90 threatened amphibian species. And this is the result too, which we have generated the high diverse areas after overlaying each map of the different taxa all together, and we have identified where the high diverse areas can be present. So we name this high diverse area where the numbers, if we take 10 numbers of species, if more than 5 number of species present some area, we name them as the high diverse areas. That's how we generate these maps. Then you can identify most of the southeastern part of the area bearing high diversity, but skinks show somewhat different because the number of threatened species we use skinks is somewhat lower. So that maps has some contraventions. Then these are the already protected areas where actually high diverse areas when we overlay with the protected areas. And after we generated these maps with the protected areas, overlay with the protected areas, we identified that the peak wilderness has the most prioritized protected area for the amphibians and the knuckles range for the skinks and the geckos. These are the other areas at the top level, prioritized protected area where high or the rich diversity of these species could be present. Then the highly diverse unprotected areas. I have mentioned that we separated the high diverse area after overlaying with the protected areas. We separate already protected and unprotected. So these are the unprotected areas, and we overlay these areas with the land use, and these are the results that we obtained, that we demarcated into 3 groups, which we can protect further, and some spaces we actually not could be protected because some of the lands actually urbanized and buildings were conducted, though the climatic layers and all the other factors favorable for that species, but we unable to protect those species. The red color areas we mentioned, those areas we cannot go for further protection. And these are the numbers that I have mentioned, that most of the wet zone, the green color mentioned about the most of the species could be present in the wet zone, where unprotected areas we can go for more conservation areas. We have generated more than 5 square kilometer areas and less than 5 square kilometer area and separated, because if we go for the conservation, I think go for large extent conservation is much better than conserving really small forest patches that are less than 5 square kilometer areas. So as a conclusion, I have highly distributed areas of the more than 50% of all selected threatened species within protected areas. Then most important areas of the selected species are also observed outside the protected areas. As you all see, you looking at the maps, and the fragmented small forest patches harbor rich diversity, which we have to focus on further protection. And Singharaja, Knuckles Peak Wilderness as considered as the prioritized protected areas where high diverse species could be present. Then in the Maxent model, the altitude precipitation like layers highly affected while demarcating the species distribution, because the altitude can generate the actually where the species can be present. The altitude can be highly influenced. And as recommendations, there are existing protected areas and unprotected high diverse areas and small areas attached to protected areas. So these are the recommendations I am supposed to give, like forest fragmentation, buffer zones, and the corridors. And these are the future implementations for the wildlife conservation and the forest department. Those are the limitations I have already explained. Thank you for, especially for the referred foundation for supporting to allow me to do this presentation, and especially for the Idea Wild team and Postgraduate Institute of Science and all the other mentioned names of these acknowledgement slide. Thank you.